Acton Finance Committee to order. Please note we are being recorded by ActonTV. I'd like to welcome in person for the first time our two new members, Avi Patel and Stephen Walsh. Nice to see you all. Nice to see the faces and to be in person again. I apologize for the late start. We are going to jump right into my actual agenda. Public participation is the first item. Seeing no members of the public, I will move on to a CPC presentation and invite Mr. Charter up. And thank you for coming. These are not my notes.
Thank you. So, I have to do a preamble and tell you that considering CPC is meeting tonight as we speak and deliberating, most everything I say is sort of equivocal. But I think we're pretty close to consensus on a lot of the items. For those of you who are not familiar with the way that we conduct our business, we receive all of the applications, we get hearings with all of the applicants, and then a spreadsheet is sent out by the planning staff, and everybody scores each one of the projects, awards the amount of money that they think is appropriate. This is all done without deliberation, and then the spreadsheets are all sent to planning staff. They compile the whole thing, and at our next public meeting, that's revealed. So sometimes there are some wide variances between what one member thinks is important, what another member thinks is important. And then it usually takes a couple of sessions to come to consensus. I say consensus, usually we get probably 80–85% agreement on the items, and then it's just a matter of awarding the dollars. So this year was particularly challenging because we had about $3 million worth of requests and about $1,600,000 to spend. So the process was a great deal more rigorous than it has been in the past. I've been on CPC, I think, for 5 years now, and prior to that, when I was working as town staff, I made many applications to CPC for a lot of town projects. So I can just kind of go through the list. One of the other things that's happened during the process, and this is not uncommon, a lot of the applicants, when they see the kind of questioning that they're subjected to, they come back with modifications to their requests, and they cut back on what they're asking for. Sometimes we've had people withdraw. At this point, we've not had any withdrawals this year. The other thing that happens is that the total number of dollars is sort of a moving target, because as projects are completed that have been funded in previous years, if all of the funding has not been used up, that gets put back into the fund. So we've actually, I think we've added probably $80,000 or $100,000 into the fund just in the last 2 months since we started. So we've cleaned those up. So the two numbers tend to move around a bit. So what I'll do is I'll just kind of go through the list of the sorts of projects that we've got that we're considering and where we stand right now. The first project, which is probably the highest visibility project, is the work at the Asa Parlin House behind Town Hall. CPC did fund, put some money into that 2 years ago, and then there was a state earmark as well. The original request this year from the town manager was a little over $1 million, $1,063,000 request. After a great deal of discussion, and the design of the building seems to be changing, and there was a lot of skepticism on the part of many of the members, the new request that the town manager brought back a few weeks ago was for only $336,000. At this point, I think that we're pretty close. I think we're close to consensus that CPC is going to recommend an appropriation of $250,000 to advance that project. Part of the difference is that the request was for historic preservation, and a lot of the work, including in addition to the building, we were not convinced was really historic preservation. So the project has been scaled back considerably. It's basically a stabilization of the building and removal of some of the other later 1970s additions. So we're at about $250,000 right now. I can run through these and ask for questions, or I can, at the end, or I could ask questions, answer questions along the way, whichever you prefer.
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and take some questions on Asa Parlin now. I assume members have things to say. Jason, go ahead.
So the original request was to be on the historic preservation bucket. Which bucket are you going to end up in?
It's still under the historic preservation.
Still under historic preservation. And if it is not done, what percentage of the rest of the historic preservation requests are there? Because I understand you have to have a certain percentage in these different buckets.
That's correct.
And is it 10% that has to happen in historic preservation?
Yes, that's correct.
Without this $250,000, will historic preservation be in jeopardy?
I don't think so. We have a later project under historic preservation that would eat up that 10% anyway.
Excellent. I'm happy to hear that. Next question I have on this is that the overall project plan is still in that 1.06 to 1.4, original 1.06 to 1.4 million dollar estimate, correct? Even if you only do the $250,000 now, it is still, it's not like the project's done. It's still going to be a north of $1 million project to get it to a quote-unquote usable space, correct?
That's correct. The work that is being proposed under the scaled-down project is just the stabilization of the existing building and the removal of the wing that sticks out towards Town Hall. Basically, it would be a weather-tight shell for the building, and that would be it. It would be not in danger of falling over anymore, but it's certainly not going to be anything that will be occupiable.
So correct me if I'm wrong, I believe we spent $50,000 or $55,000 a couple of years ago for asbestos removal and for stabilization. Was that $55,000 or $50,000 not enough to actually stabilize the building? Is it still in jeopardy of falling down?
The building, a lot of the stabilization actually had to do with the removal of the low one-story wing that came out towards the parking lot.
Okay.
That was removed. Asbestos through the entire building was removed. Once you took that back one-story wing off there were some structural members. My understanding is, I've not been involved intimately with the project for many years. There was some stabilization that had to be done just to keep the rest of the building kind of shifting backwards. And if you look at the front of the building right now, the side towards Woodbury Lane, and you push against the wall, the entire wall moves back and forth.
Don't tempt me.
So it's, it's not in good shape. Yeah, they did the asbestos, they did the stabilization, but they really weren't complete with it.
Okay. I would just like to say to the committee that I think that this is a classic case of potential mission creep. We already spent $50,000 on stabilization. Now we're asking for $250,000 on stabilization. We don't even have a approved, voted on plan, and it's going to be at least $1 million. The original ask was actually $1.4 million in the original ARPA ask. So this is just going to roll and roll and roll. I have two problems with this. One, I don't think it's worth it. Two, I think it would be much better for them to come with a full-fledged plan and get buy-in from the town before just constantly piecemeal dripping our money into something without a finalized plan. So I'm actually very happy to hear that the The historic preservation will not be at risk. If it was, I was going to actually advise that you come up with something else to put in that historic preservation bucket. And I, for one at least, am going to try and hold this at town meeting and say that we should absolutely not move forward on this until we have a approved plan from the entire town. And then you can go find funding for it rather than drip, drip, drip it. So thank you for your time.
Sorry, quick question, and then I'll let Steve ask his. Did you guys approved a plan at select board meeting? Is that plan that you looked at quite a few months back? Is that still the proposed end state for that building, or are you still also considering?
I think there's, obviously there's some perception as to what was agreed to. I think what was shown to us initially when the town manager brought in the request to CPC was pretty much the plan that was agreed to by the select board. And then the phasing is really what impacts it. Now, during the process with the select board, there was some discussion about expanding the project. And then there was talk about scaling the project back. So it's sort of a moving target, and a lot of the discussion at CPC mirrored exactly what's just been said.
Okay, thank you. Steve, go ahead.
Hi, Dean. So how long have we been talking about this one?
Pardon me?
How long have we been talking about this one? 10, 12 years?
Well, we purchased the building in order to build the addition on the Memorial Library, which I believe we purchased the land, I believe, in 1997. And I observed to the town manager the other day that building was a millstone around my neck for about 20 years, and I fully expect it'll be a millstone around his neck for his next 20 years.
I believe, I do recall you suggesting at one point we take a picture, build a facade and tear the rest of it down.
Yep.
But I do think once and for all we have to decide what we're going to do with the thing. I think at some point some board of selectmen voted to tear it down. It just seems it's like a cat with 9 lives. We can't make anything out of it, and we can't seem to kill it. And I'm sure Roland can back me up on this. We can tell you exactly where some of the structural members were weak, because we almost knocked over one of the posts in the basement by leaning on it 10 years ago. So in some ways, I hate to see us put a whole lot more into structural support, because I've been kind of thinking it would fall down one of these days.
Adam?
Well, I definitely do feel like we're sort of whipping a dead horse, constantly talking about it. I will echo a little bit of what Jason said with regard to the creep, because I know at one of the select board meetings I attended where we discussed the plans for Ace of Parlin, one of the community members brought one of the old plans for the Ace of Parlin house, which could have been completed something like 10 years ago for about a cost of $330,000, right? So we're also looking at a situation where 10 years from now, we might be looking at the plan that we just reviewed for $1.4 million and say, God, remember when we could have fixed it for $1.4 million and now it's going to cost $5 million? I think perhaps for a little bit of edification for some of our newer members, and maybe I haven't said this among us at FinCom, but I know I did stand up and say this at the one of the select board meetings. If you go online, and of course you can't believe everything you read online, but if you go online and look at the site that talks specifically about the preservation of that particular house, it was built, the late 1800s, I believe, so it's not going back to the origin of the town of Acton. It was built by, if I'm not mistaken, not Asa Parlin, but one of Asa Parlin's grandchildren or great-grandchildren who happened to be a caretaker at the cemetery on Concord Avenue. And, looking at it, I'm not an architectural expert, but it doesn't seem like the best example of that particular era of housing. So I just don't have the affinity for it that I would have for other nice houses. So I guess what I would like to say at this point is I would be in favor of just killing this thing once and for all, unfortunately. Thanks.
Also, for the history of the members, the select board made that motion once and the town voted to keep the property, which is why we're in the position we're in. I'm just going to keep going this way. Mike, did you have anything?
Yes, I do. The Ace of Parliament House, I think, is an interesting property. What makes it interesting is that its location adjacent to Town Hall, and I know that the town needs more meeting space. But just driving by it tonight, seeing how tiny it is, it's no way they could ever make it suitable for the plan that they intended, a cultural center as well for those people. All those people would never fit in it. But if you compromise, reduce the plans to a just clean meeting space with maybe some state-of-the-art technology for teleconferencing and things like that, but it could make a small to medium-sized conference center, but not a cultural center with anything more than, say, 30 people. And I agree with the history isn't consistent. It's not Ace of Parliament's house. And even if it was, Ace of Parliament voted not to affirm our Constitution. So the hell with him. He also created this meeting house that used to be right on the Meeting House Hill, if my history is correct. So he was a big deal in his day and a good person, and I'm sure he had his reasons for not ratifying the Constitution. But anyway, I think there's other if they're talking about a conference center, maybe the site on Concord Road. I was just looking at the historic properties on Concord Road, and that building, the farmhouse, is not even listed. And if you drive by it, there's just a little sign that says, whatever it says, the name of but you have no idea.
Morrison Farm. Yep.
Right. But you have no idea what's behind there. All the vast open space, the trails, the community gardens, and that could be, there's plenty of space there. Although I would recommend having the fire department do one of their fire exercises on that building, because it's not of any historic age either. And just build a nice, clean, it'll be more efficient. You have more space, build it right there. Could have any number of purposes. But this Ace of Parliament, I think the only way it's going to succeed is if, as you said, they vastly cut the budget. You've already cut it quite significantly. So I don't know if anything's left, but, and then even if you create something, what is it that you have? How will it be used? If it's just another historic shell, Acton has plenty of those historic shells that really serve no purpose. So if push comes to shove, I would shove that project.
Okay, Dave. Isha?
So I'm going to keep what I have to say, hopefully relatively crisp. I would echo what Jason said, to say that our point of view actually has a statement about parcels of land that the town purchases, to say that we should have a clearly delineated plan prior to that purchase. And I would really hope that anything that we do with properties that we have acquired to put further money into them, we continue to abide by that same principle, that we have a plan in place before we spend more money on this. I think that money could be well used for so many other purposes that I think are far more critical. We don't need a community space that is really not adequate, so that we're going to end up building another community center sometime down the line. I think it's just really short-sighted, and we shouldn't invest any more in this. Thanks.
Thank you. Avi, do you have any questions for Dean? No, okay. Roland?
Thanks, Dean. Jason, so if they don't spend on the 3 buckets, they have to have the 10% they can put in a set-aside fund. So my question, Dean, you said that you have about 180 to 100,000 in recapture, turnbacks, et cetera. Will any of that money being returned put those years' allotments under the threshold?
I
know that's tracked by planning departments.
Yeah, some of those returns will, I'm not sure if they'll actually bring them out of compliance, but
Okay.
there is a host of other historic resource projects that we're considering this year. So I don't think we have to worry about squirreling away any more money
Okay.
for later years.
You know how I feel about the Ace Parlin House. I mean, I think you should take the windows out and make it a birdhouse. And eventually it'll fall down and that'll be the end of it. From what I understood, the historic district said, no, you can't tear it down. So that's why it's still somewhat standing. Jason, go push the wall after the meeting and see what happens.
If this falls down, I swear I didn't do it. I'm not getting involved.
I didn't see anything happen.
The letter from
Okay.
the HDC was 2014. The 31st of August 2014 is when the HDC declared that this cannot be torn down.
And yeah, it was, Steve and I were in the basement when we checked out that project that time. And it's full of water and the beams were rotted. Eventually it's just gonna cave in. And I just don't see the value. I mean, I like your original plan. Take a picture of it, build a replica, and you're done. And just build a shell. If you want to keep something on the property, I think it should be turned down. You could use it to park the new EV fleet that comes into town for the town hall, and put the town hall vehicles on there and open up the parking space for everybody else who's visiting town hall and the library. So I cannot support any money being put in that property. So it's my 2 cents.
Steve? Okay. I promise nothing else you bring before us will have quite the impact as the Ace of Parlin House always does.
It's, I just want to assure you that right now I'm wearing the hat as CPC chair, and
Yes.
I'm not the proponent of this particular project, just to add a little more gasoline to the fire. A couple of the items that I've reviewed as far as, long-term use of the building and, the cultural center idea and meeting room space and all that. I've pointed out on a number of occasions that, certainly there was a real shortage of meeting room space in this building historically, and for a while, part of my remit was trying to figure out meeting room space for everybody, and it was quite challenging. However, we've added some spaces. We have 2 really nice meeting spaces available. One at 50 Audubon Drive, which was the old senior center, now the recreation center, and there's meeting room space there where you could probably put 70 or 80 people at a time. And it has a commercial kitchen that was put in at great expense. And then we have 30 Sudbury Road, the rental space, where again, we've got a number of meeting rooms there and a commercial kitchen. So I think there's the idea that's going to solve a lot of problems for us as far as meeting room space. There are other solutions to the problem. There's some logistical issues with that as far as just getting the buildings opened and closed at night. But the big stumbling block, frankly, is that the building is within the historic district. The town is exempt from the demolition delay bylaw, which is enforced by the Historical Commission, but we're not exempt from the dictates of the Historic District Commission. And they've dug their heels in and said you can't take it down. So that's kind of driven a lot of the thought processes. And here we are. And CPC keeps getting asked for money because it's a good way to get money that it doesn't have the high visibility of actually having a warrant article for $1 million going to town meeting floor and being voted on.
With that in mind, is there any concern that the building is a safety concern at the moment? Is there an argument to be made that an investment somewhere south of the number being requested might be necessary in order to, keep ourselves from a liability issue?
I broached that years ago when I was still in charge of such things. I went to the building commissioner about it and said, can you just order the demolition of the building because it's unsafe? And what the commissioner at that time said, and we've got a new commissioner, was that he says, if I deem that it's unsafe, he says, there's enough room around it, so you just put a construction fence all the way around it and let it fall. So he would not order it to be demolished. He said if it was in danger of falling out into the street, then he could so order that, if he determined that it was a hazard. But since there's enough room around it, it can collapse upon itself, and it's going to make it look even worse than it does now out there, but.
Sure. Okay. Jason, do you have something new to say?
I was just going to say that while the Historic District Commission has said that we can't tear it down, they also cannot compel us to spend any money on it to preserve it.
There you go. Thank you. Would you like to move on?
Okay, thank you. So the next project was some work at the Woodlawn Cemetery Chapel. That's the granite chapel you see on Concord Road at the edge of the Woodlawn Cemetery. It was donated to the town back in the 1930s. It was privately constructed. There is actually a private trust fund, which is money not controlled by the town, which pays for a lot of the upkeep. The building was not handicapped accessible, and for that reason, there was not any opportunity to have any services there. Either funerals or, surprisingly, weddings seemed to be very popular for a funeral chapel. So the request was for $200,000 to provide handicap access to the front and to create an accessible restroom and do some other work. That was about $200,000 in original request, and then there was pretty much a match, or more than a match, that was going to come from this private trust fund to do some additional work there. During the process, the request was reduced to $185,000. This ended up as a surprisingly controversial project. There are still some heirs and descendants of the original folks that paid for this that had objections to the scope of work. And it just seemed more and more as we were dealing with it that this was the first time we'd seen the project, and it was really not ready for prime time. So at least as of our last meeting on the 8th, there is no support for any funding whatsoever for that project this year. And we'll suggest they come back next year. They said this might be subject to change, but I think it's a pretty firm no that I heard the other night.
Okay.
Next project was the 53rd River Street Dam project, the Shoddy mill, they refer to it. Request was for $182,450 for work basically just for preserving the historic resources on the site, for hiring an archaeologist to be on site when the dam is being removed, and some work with a mill race, which is one of the topological features of the site, to restore that. This, if you go down there now, you'd say, well, there's nothing there other than a falling apart dam. We've been ordered by the state to either restore the dam to its original situation or to remove it in its entirety, and there's been quite a bit of money spent on that already from various sources. But we can't proceed any further without the Corps of Engineers permits, which include historic preservation of the site. So we're pretty much stymied on that. There has been some ground penetrating radar research done there. They found a few artifacts on the site. They've found some interesting materials on site buried, including quite a large quantity of wool that has been buried underground for close to 100 years.
Did you say wool?
Wool.
Okay, thanks.
It was shoddy, the term shoddy, that was a term for a cloth that was used from recycling materials. And especially after World War I, a lot of the wool uniforms came back from overseas and were shredded up and made into less desirable materials and felt. So there's, hence the name, something that's shoddy, it kind of falls apart. One of the other artifacts they found was huge quantities of buttons that had just been dumped there, cut all the buttons off the uniforms.
Those are cool.
There'd been other uses for the site, but those are sort of the interesting things. At one time, it was a very significant industrial operation down there. So in any case, at this point, I think we have consensus that CPC is going to back the request for $182,450. And you see that that's one of the big buckets that we're putting money into for historic preservation.
Any questions about that? Okay, thanks.
Next, a request again for Woodlawn Cemetery. The Revolutionary War section of the cemetery, which is closest to the intersection of Concord Road and Hosmer Street. They want to restore a number of the gravestones. And there's a request for $50,000, plus I believe the cemetery commissioners have an additional $50,000 that they're going to put into it to restore these stones, preserve them, upright them, using proper techniques to remove the lichens so that they'll be legible again, and some stabilization of the stone itself. This was a pretty attractive project. Again, it's only $50,000. And since we're only a couple of years away from the 250th anniversary of the Battle of the North Bridge, it seems like a really appropriate use of the money. So that, at this point, has been agreed to. Next project is actually a private nonprofit project. Two projects having to do with the ironwork farm. Putting on some storm windows on the Jones Tavern and painting the exterior of the Faulkner Homestead. The two of them total up to about $40,000. The Jones Tavern storm windows, they asked for an appropriation a couple of years ago. We gave them what they asked for. They had an exact number of the storm windows they wanted to put on, the window restoration. They got that done, and it turns out they didn't spend all the money. They came back and they said, gee, can we use the rest of your money? And we said, no, not until you come back to town meeting and get it approved. So that was one of the turnbacks. They gave us back, I think, about $20,000. So we're basically repurposing it to let them do that. The other part of the project that received a little bit of discussion is the exterior painting of the Faulkner Homestead. In the past, the interpretation was that routine painting is a maintenance project rather than a capital project, and therefore is not allowable for CPC funding. However, there have been a number of communities that have done such projects, and we've got some guidance from the Community Preservation Coalition that seems to say that it's okay, and Town Council said it's a value judgment on the part of the committee whether or not you want to fund it. So that's about $20,000 to paint the exterior of the building. The thought is that you can use funding to preserve a building. And the thought was that a good coat of paint is preservation. If you just wanted to paint it to change the color, it would not be appropriate. So that had some discussion, but in any case, between those two projects, both with a private nonprofit, both of those buildings have historic preservation restrictions put on them anyway from previous funding. And we have a really good feeling about the folks that run the operation. So there's about $40,000 at this point is agreed to.
Go ahead, Roland.
Is the Faulkner house, is that the original color that it was original to the house, or is that something that, like, Town Hall was white, you went back to the original historic colors, which I wasn't in favor for in the beginning, but when you see the end result, looks great. So it doesn't look like there's any distinctive color on the Faulkner house. And I was thinking, was it always that color, or did it used to be white or something else, and they just,
It's,
I don't know if you know.
that's a good question, and here I'm speculating, but that's not an uncommon colonial color that was put on there. And since ironwork involved using a lot of bog iron, and under certain circumstances, the mixture of the proper amount of bog iron in with the linseed oil and other materials that we use for painting probably would yield a color that would be somewhat similar to that. But as far as whether anybody can testify that that's the right color, I'm not aware of any study being done. I suspect it's correct.
Mike?
Again, in light of the upcoming 250th, I'm in favor of dressing up some of these historic properties, and besides the two you just mentioned, we might identify some others that need dressing up, coat of paint or something.
Yep.
Steve?
Yeah, Dean, help me out, or maybe Roland can help me out. Did we pay for the painting of Exchange Hall, or did we pay for all the preparation and clapboard replacement, and they paid for the painting?
That was pre-me. So I suspect that with a lot of these projects, you could, using CPC funds, if you did some carpentry work and maybe some window restoration, and then you painted the building as a final touch, all of that would be appropriate for CPC funding. I'm not sure that was the case there, and everybody's got a really sore toe about that building.
Well, no kidding. Do you remember, Roland?
Yeah, I think part of the funding was that it included the paint. That's my recollection of it. It's in need of another paint job right now.
It didn't last.
I know he put a lot of money into it when he did it, but then he wanted to get the CPC to give him this check. And the deal was that he had to put a elevator to the top floor, to the ballroom floor. Mm-hmm. And he wasn't going to do that. And the CPC said, well, you're not going to do that. You're not going to get your check. So he put out what they call a LULA, a limited use lift apparatus. And that's what he had to put in. He had didn't have any choice to it. So that's how that ended up happening. And then he eventually got his money, but.
I didn't mean to bring up another historic subject.
Yeah,
I just thought we painted a historic building with CPC funds, but my memory could be off.
partially, I'll say.
Okay, excellent.
All right, next we move on to recreation projects. Now, as you folks, I'm sure know, there are 3 areas that have mandatory funding, 10%, historic preservation, community housing, and open space. And then there's the 4th category, which there's no mandatory spending on, which is recreation. So there was a request to put in a small play structure at the front of the recreation center at 50 Audubon Drive. The request was $75,000. Everybody agreed to 0 on that one, because there are a number of recreation projects which we'll go through later on, but it's sort of a remote area, and really it was not being used. Certainly it would be available to the public if they went up there, but primarily it was being used as a They're now running a daycare operation out of that building, the recreation department is, and summer camp. And it was really being used to support their camp operation, and it wasn't really something that was going to be a benefit to the entire public. So for that reason, at least as of 2 weeks ago, it's zero. Next subject, Gardner Field Phase 3 landscaping request. Gardner Field has gotten quite a bit of money from CPC. They've got a state earmark, and they also received a considerable amount of ARPA funding. Plus, there was about $80,000, I believe, that was raised from the community to do that project. So they have funding in place to do almost the entire thing, and what they came in for was they asked for $100,000 for additional landscaping and a gate and some other items. But there's really not been a lot of work done on there yet. I think it started just a few weeks ago. At this point, it looks like CPC is going to be recommending $50,000 instead of $100,000 for that project.
Is that because you thought they were asking an excessive amount for what they needed, or because you think it can be done in a scaled down way and still accomplish the same kind of outcome?
Well, I think the problem that the committee had, and again, you know, we're under this really rigorous constraint as to how much money we've got to allocate.
Right.
But, you know, a lot of materials have not yet gone out to bid yet. We don't know what the exact project is going to look like and how much money they're going to have left. I think, you know, a lot of the discussion circled around, well, gee, why don't you, you know, go as far as you can with the money you've got and then come back next year and ask us to finish it. And there was a big pushback that, no, we really want to get this thing one and done and be over and done with it. So that was the tension on the project. So it's, you say we had $50,000, which looked like a reasonable agreement, but I'm not sure that I might be surprised when I turn on my computer tonight.
Okay. Any questions? Okay, great.
Okay, Elm Street tennis courts. These are sort of adjacent to Douglas School, which will be departing shortly. Tennis courts have been there for quite some time. In my tenure working for the town, we restored them entirely. It's ready for them to be done again. Request was for $165,000. The tennis courts are heavily used. They're in really bad shape. There's a lot of tripping hazards there. And the nice thing about it is that they are going to put 2 sets of stripes on them so that they can be used as pickleball courts as well as tennis courts. Pickleball now being the trendy thing that everybody wants to play rather than tennis. Yep. So at this point, it appears that we have consensus to approve $165,000 for the tennis courts.
Okay. All right. Oh, go ahead, Adam.
Does that include also the sort of basketball court area that I think is just adjacent to it?
This would just be the tennis courts themselves.
Okay, thanks.
Jason?
I can answer that question for you. The basketball courts are being mostly rebuilt as part of the school rebuild.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. Thank you.
So, the next one is, again, under recreation. It's a boardwalk at Heath and Meadow Conservation Area. The Heath and Meadow goes between the back of Mount Hope Cemetery and goes into the back of Robbins Street in South Acton. There's a huge wetland there. Heath and Meadow is a contributory brook to Fort Pond Brook. The request was for $38,000. There's an existing boardwalk and bridge there now, which are in pretty bad shape. They're about 20 years old, and they're all wood. This new one would actually be metal and a plastic material for the decking. $38,000, and that's been pretty much agreed to as well.
Okay.
Next project is Windsor Green window replacement. Windsor Green is the elderly and disabled housing operation run by the Housing Authority over on Windsor Ave. They're looking for $270,000 to replace all of the windows. A year or two ago, we funded the replacement of all of the sliding glass doors at the back of the buildings. Those buildings are all like 45 years old. So $270,000. It's not been agreed to yet. I think it will be tonight. It's just we hadn't got to it yet. But the CPC has been very supportive of Housing Authority projects in the past, and the nice thing about it for us is that they're all subject to public bid. They're supervised by an architect. It's a very high visibility project. With the Housing Authority projects, we can fund exterior work on the buildings, but can't, it's inappropriate to use CPC funds to do the interiors of these buildings. So, situations like replacing appliances and that sort of thing is not something you can use CPC funding for. I know there's been a lot of discussion about that recently. So I'm pretty sure that's going to pass. I can't imagine that it would not.
Those are the original windows, right? 45-year-old windows?
Original
It's not
windows.
like it was replaced 10 years ago, right?
Yeah, they're
No-brainer.
original. And they're going to be replaced with Anderson Series 400s, which is what I put in my house, so my house is about the same age. So. Next item, Regional Housing Services Officer. This is under community housing as well, and this is an administrative function. As a contractor that's hired by the town, they serve in this function for a variety of towns. I think there's about 11 towns in the district. Basically, it's professionals that are hired that administer things like the affordable housing stock. They keep track of how many units we've got. They make sure that any of the units that have affordability restrictions on them don't end up getting sold or refinanced without those restrictions placed on them. We actually lost some units in the past from that happening. And they do help run some things like the lotteries when affordable units come up for availability. So they charge on an hourly basis, but it's $35,000 a year for this work. It's support staff for the planning department. Each year they ask for $70,000 to get 2 years, so they don't have to keep coming back, and each year we cut it back to $35,000. So right now that's what's agreed to is $35,000.
Okay. Seems like a no-brainer.
That actually is something that CPC has discussed on a number of occasions, and we'll probably discuss it after town meeting again, as to whether we'll continue to support this or whether we'll recommend to the town manager that this be folded into the town's operating budget.
Rather than using a regional person, or you mean
I would still use the
cost
regional
of this?
person, we'd do
Okay.
everything, it's just the funding would come out of a different pocket.
Okay. Roland?
This is a lot more beneficial to the town to do it this way than to have a staff do it. It would cost us a lot more money to have a staff member you have to have a different, individuals, somebody that would have to hire, et cetera, and it would cost the town a heck of a lot more money than going the regional way. I remember when it first started, I was chair at the CPC, I believe, or vice chair, kind of forgetting now, it's been so long, but the cost is a little bit lower, but there was only 5 towns maybe 7 max. It's grown over the years, which helps spread the cost. So it's a better benefit to the town to fund something like this. I mean, yeah, it should really be in the town manager's budget. I agree with you there. But it's definitely a no-brainer.
Mike?
Yeah, it's just observing that this is an interesting list of deserving projects, and I think every one of them could benefit from some of that $250,000 from Ace of Parliament.
Next.
Next. Again, under community housing, Habitat for Humanity has a project at 26 Carlisle Road. The building the town foreclosed on, ended up transferring over to Habitat for Humanity for, I believe, $1. They're going to build a really nice little one-family unit right there, which will be privately held, which will generate tax revenue for the town, and there'll be an affordability restriction placed on it. They're asking for $40,000 to help fund the project. And again, no final decision, but I'm pretty sure that they're going to get that.
Adam?
The affordability restriction that's placed on that, does that automatically throw that into part of our safe harbor issue?
Yes, it does.
Thank you very much.
ACHC, Acton Community Housing Corporation, Community Housing Program Fund. This is a fund that's a quasi-public agency. Money goes into that. ACHC has a board of directors. Right now it's chaired by Janet Adachi, one of our former selectmen. They fund a number of projects. They put money towards Habitat for Humanity. They'll help people with some startup costs sometimes. Every year they have a different set of things that they can do with their money. They also have some development funds that have been donated to them. There's quite a considerable amount of money, I believe, that came to ACHC's treasury through linkage funds for the Concord Muse project, which is right on the border of Acton. So they've got some private money, plus they have some public money. So they can move fairly quickly, but they can't spend any of the money, public money, without the approval of the select board. So it goes there, they get a chance to, work on these projects, and they bring them to the select board. Their request was for $100,000, which is every couple of years they ask for $100,000. I'm not sure where that's going to go. I think more likely they'll probably get about $50,000. And I think, reading the body language, I think they'd be happy with $50,000 this year. I think they understand that the restrictions that we're under right now.
Okay.
So that's...
All right.
Open space. So typically, in an ideal world, open space would get probably 30% of the total amount that goes into the fund, CPC funding. And this gets set aside into a separate account, and it's used for negotiating purposes to help fund a project, an acquisition. In the past, typically, you'd wait until there's enough money in there and they'd buy one big parcel of land, and that would pretty much exhaust the fund, and they'd get built back up again. The last few projects that have been done, because of the high cost of land now, there's been funding, bonding that's been used. For instance, the Stonefield Farm acquisition, Wright Hill was another one. So certain amount of the bond payments are coming out of this as well. So the fund doesn't increase as quickly as it used to. This year they came in and they asked for $500,000. They've got quite a bit of support. A lot of discussion amongst the committee that, save a few dollars here and there on some of the other projects and try to put more into open space, because the price of land is just going through the roof. So I feel fairly confident that they'll probably get something around $500,000 would be the recommendation. But again, that's sort of the last unknown out there that they'll probably work on tonight.
All right.
And then lastly, CPA Administrative Support. The law allows up to 5% of the funds allocated, CPC, to be used for administrative support. This is for support from the planning staff, support from the finance people, because there are a lot of exemptions and calculation that have to be done downstairs in the bean counter wing. And their original request was for $80,000. And this year, they actually scaled that back, and they're only asking for $61,000. And my understanding was a lot of that, there's been a lot of turnover of staff, especially in the planning department. So their hourly rates are lower, so we've actually been able to save some money with we did lose some really senior staff down there, so now there's a little extra, so they've basically backed off on that. So instead of 5%, it's probably closer to 4% that they're asking for this year. So we feel good about that. I can't imagine anybody's going to argue about it at this point. And that's it. That wraps up the state of the projects.
Steve.
Thanks, Dean. Yeah, my recollection is from years ago when I was more closely involved with the committee that open space allocations were in the $400,000 or $500,000 range then, and you're right, land has done nothing but skyrocket in value. So to parallel what Mike said, you know, if you got a couple $100,000 left over from the Asa Parlin house, wouldn't be bad to put it in open space.
Yep.
When do you anticipate the committee will make its final decisions?
Hopefully by 11 o'clock tonight, or maybe by 9 o'clock, so I don't have to dial into them. I think they're going to be really close. There might be a vote taken tonight, or it'll be 2 weeks hence.
Okay.
And, you know, I can certainly be happy to come back and update you as to exactly where we stand on this. And the spreadsheet that the planning folks put together has all of the detail in there, and you know, once that's been updated, which will be very shortly, that'll give you a lot more detail on it. And I can certainly come back to talk about any other items you've got in mind.
I'll leave that up to the chair, but thank you for a very detailed explanation of the projects.
Roland.
Thanks, Dean. I am the liaison to CPC, but anyway, long story short. Do we know when the bond will be paid off for Wright Hill? Do you know what year that is? I know that was done, maybe Mr. Barrett knows, so do we know when the various bonds are paid off on the open space side? I'm not counting Stonefield Farms, but there was also one for, I want to say Piper Lane, but it's not Piper Lane, or it's something off of that bought extra land that goes into.
It is Piper Lane.
It is Piper Lane, okay. Do you know when those two bonds are paid off?
I don't, Rowan. I know Wright Hill is probably, I think we put that out 15 years.
That was 15 years at the time.
And we're probably 5 years in.
5 years into it, yeah.
So we're probably 10 years or less to a strike date. I can get you that data in soon.
Oh, I just think it'd be good to have in the town warrant when the various bonds on the CPC, when you do the article of when they're paid off, so they can say, okay, we're in year 5 of Wright Hill, we're in year 4 of Piper, that type of thing. It's just more transparency, so the town goes, okay, in 5 years, X is rolling off. Just as much as we know in the next year to two that Parker Damon building's paid off and the public safety building's paid off.
We'll get that data to CPC.
Yeah,
Great, thank you.
Piper Lane was 2008, 2009, somewhere in that range, so.
Well, there was one that was bought not that long ago that preserved.
We got that
additional
neat
land.
house.
The first Piper Lane was 2008, 2009, but then there was a second one.
Yeah.
The second one is the one they bonded.
Okay.
The first one was not bonded, but came with a house.
Don't get Dean and I started on the house.
Well, the house ended up being sold, so that worked to get what we need to get done. So that's the type of thing that, knowing what the bond schedules, when to be paid off. Just more transparency.
Okay, any further questions for Dean? Thank you. Thank you very much
Hey.
for your time.
Thank you.
Enjoy your next meeting.
Have a good night.
Any further discussion about any of these CPC topics before I move on? No, good, excellent.
Yeah, I do want to say.
Yeah, okay, Adam?
I just want to say something about the bridge down at Heath is one of the most beautiful spots in Acton. I highly suggest you get down there around sunset. The bridge has a nice beaver dam under it, which recently they've had to put some culverts in to let water through. And a couple years ago, in a big storm, a tree fell on it, and I was part of the crew that went down there to fix it. But it's one of the first places my family and I went to and visited when we first moved to Acton, and it's just gorgeous. So get down there. If you go into the cemetery on Central and just go straight to the back of it and just keep walking downhill until you get to the little bridge that goes across the pond, or it's Fort Pond Brook. It's gorgeous. Go there. Sure, I'll take you there. Yeah.
Since during the pandemic, I've walked just about every trail in Acton. I can tell you that the Heath Hen Meadow Boardwalk needs to be replaced.
Okay, excellent. All right. The next item on our agenda is the town budget, which we're not really going to vote on, but the town manager has submitted his final budget to us. And does anybody have any further discussion they would like to have on the town budget as submitted and amended at this time? Christy.
I just want to make a statement about it. I was very appreciative. I was hesitant when the changes were around the capital improvement plan, because we don't want to see any deferred maintenance going in. We all know that's the easiest place to cut money when things get tight. But honestly, the changes don't really do any of that. It ends up you can't get electric cars right now anyhow, so pushing that out of next year's budget isn't a problem. And the other things you could just sort of, it's okay to slow roll it. So cutting out the money that they found, I think, was actually done really, really nicely. And that was the only major difference with the budget. So I was very happy.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, that was my sense as well. And the town manager did offer to come and speak to us about the budget if we have any further questions, but I did not get the sense from our previous discussions that we felt that that was going to be necessary. So we will take a vote on the town budget at a later meeting, officially and formally. We're down to Finance Committee business, but don't get too excited. We have a couple of things that might take a little extra time to discuss in this section. I do have a set of minutes, but I didn't forward them to the committee, so we will vote on those in our next meeting. Jason, do you have any more POV dates to book?
No new POV dates, but just by way of quick reminder, Douglas is April the 27th and McCarthytown is April 12th. Roland and Christie are on the hook for Mbta on April 12th, and on April 27th is, sorry, I thought I had it on the spreadsheet. I will send out an email reminding the people who are on the hook for Douglas.
Okay. Does anybody know if they're doing the 27th? Okay.
Thank you. Great.
For
I have not figured out who to ask for on that. I need to hurry up and ask on that. And I'm sorry to say, Conan has not responded at all. Gotten no response from Conan at all, which was a surprise, because last time we did this in person, that was the school that had the largest turnout. They had like 30 people.
Yeah, and they were very receptive.
Yeah, so I was surprised that Conan has not responded at all.
Maybe you did such a great job. They're set for the next 5 years.
Nice try, Adam, nice try.
Dave?
I use the presentation on the acton-ma.gov FinCom page.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that's the same as the one that was sent around, I think that it should be the same, but I like pointing people to that page if they
Yeah.
want a copy.
That should be the updated correct one. Thank you.
That's the one you Yeah, that was the correct one.
Okay, good. So those two meetings, not this one apparently, but those two meetings, unfortunately, will also require a 7:45 start date because those presentations tend to happen at 7 PM. So we will keep meeting at 7:45 until we get out of those presentation times. Jason, you're making a face. Never mind.
The only one that's going to require is the one on the 12th. The 27th is a Wednesday.
Oh, excellent, perfect. So the 12th will be our last 7:45 start. We'll go back to a 7:30 start. Liaison reports. Jason, anything on the school building committee? It's been a little bit.
It's been a little bit. Unfortunately, I missed the last meeting. They are doing, there is a point now where they're able to do tours again. So the school building committee is doing a tour in the next week or so. And I would be happy to ask them to set another pair of days for the finance committee to do a walkthrough if the committee would like to see it as it gets closer to the end. I'm seeing one thumbs up. I'm seeing enough thumbs up that I should make that request. I will make that request. I can say that that people are getting quite excited because it's actually starting to look indeed like a building even from the inside at this point. So
Are we opening in the fall?
we are on target.
Sweet.
Christy, anything? Steve?
Yeah, the health insurance trust met, and we reviewed the results for 8 months of the fiscal year, and our trend is much better than it was last year, which sounds positive, except last year was pretty much of a disaster. So we're doing way better, but we're still not at, say, break-even levels. So the proposed 10% increase for next year's budget still stands.
That's exciting. Hold on, Adam.
Yes, I will.
Roland, are we up for a tour of the DPW facility tomorrow?
The study committee's having a tour and starts at 6 o'clock on Forest Street. Well, not on the street itself, but you enter on Forest Street.
So, a really busy couple of weeks. If a quorum of members attend such a tour but don't deliberate, do we need to post a meeting? Excellent. So, anybody who's interested in a tour of the facility tomorrow at 6 p.m.?
Yeah, so I also attended the open meeting and public records training that we had 2 weeks ago. Yeah, it's 2 weeks now. I'm trying to remember my weeks. I was in the office last week. And whenever you have, if you send 2 people to go study something, it's considered a subcommittee, and you have to have minutes and agendas posted. That's what came out of town council, so, for the future. But yeah, so.
I'm not sending anybody.
I'm not saying we have to study it. I'm saying we should merely observe as our own independent personnel and not necessarily do any kind of official study.
I'm not sending anybody. If you all happen to show up,
Or not.
don't deliberate. Go ahead,
Can I make a statement and ask a question?
please.
So the statement would be, if any of you are available at 6 p.m. tomorrow, I highly would encourage you to attend this, because this is going to be a big topic in the next 2 years, and especially our 2 new members, if you're available at 6 o'clock tomorrow. No better way to find out something about what's going on with one of the budgetary items in the town. It's very seldom that you get to go on site and get a firsthand view of what's going on behind the scenes and get to meet and talk to the people involved. So if you can make it, please do. There's just no better way to learn. The question I have is about your 2-member subcommittee. What does that mean for ALG?
It doesn't matter. The ALGs are different.
It's a meeting anyway.
And it posts its own minutes, but are we then supposedly required to post our own minutes?
I don't believe so. You can check with Eva on that one, but from what I recall, because ALG is from what I recall from the.
David's going to
can answer
help.
that question.
David's going to help us out here.
That'd be better.
That's a different committee, not a subcommittee. And another public body, you don't have any conflict because the meetings are public.
Excellent, thank you.
Is this a public tour? This is a public tour?
Tomorrow is posted by the study committee.
Okay. David?
So if there's not a quorum of you there, there's definitely no problem. If there is a quorum of you there, don't talk. Right?
Exactly. Thank you.
And you don't have a
Basically,
problem.
yeah.
And if you do talk, right, you can say, there's a crack in the building wall. You can't say, this building needs to be replaced.
Right. Right. We will have an informative discussion post-tour for those who are able to go on the tour. We will simply,
So for the
Go ahead,
benefit of the two new guys, don't worry, you don't count for quorum. Your
That too.
associates. So
And to be
don't
clear,
be frightened.
that informative discussion will be in a meeting with an agenda that says that that's happening.
exactly. It'll be on our very next agenda. So,
Madam Chair, since somebody brought up ALG, can I make a comment?
1 second. So, yes. So the DPW facility is a large complex facility that the town is looking at upgrading. There's already been a proposal for a $30 million building upgrade, which is being paused for further study, and we're trying to get more in the loop so that we can understand why such a big ask is on the table. And so there is a tour if you're available. If anybody's available, they're welcome to go on the tour. Where should everybody show up again, Roland?
So Forest Street, is everybody know?
14.
What number?
14 Forest Road.
Thank you. I forgot my cell phone tonight, so I can't look it up. I
Right.
realized when I got here, I said, oh, I left that at home. Kind of nice not to have the electronic leash on. Where people can bother the heck out of me that don't talk to me normally. So I'm for the new people, I am the representative from Finance Committee so I'm part of this study committee. So we're meeting tomorrow night at 14, you said? I was gonna say 6, okay. At 6 o'clock, so you go down Forest Street, you'll see the entrance, you go in the entrance. The building, you can't miss, it's on the right-hand side, it's big, and you park somewhere right in that general area.
Okay.
And then Corey's gonna start right at 6. Corey York, the head of the DPW for the town.
And that can be a difficult time for anybody who needs to commute or is dealing with families. So if you can't make it, obviously we'll do our best to keep everybody informed regardless. I will be there, so.
I cannot be there, unfortunately.
Okay. Steve.
So, I know that ALG met. There seemed, at least Adam's notes, to be some discussion about future years beyond the budget year, but no resolution. One of the things that we typically put in the warrant and address in our message is comments on the future years of the ALG plan. There's a reason for that. Under the town bylaws, this is the only committee that has specifically stated responsibility to do any long-range fiscal planning. Neither the Board of Selectmen nor the, the Select Board, thank you, Christie, or the school committee is charged with doing anything beyond the one-year budgets. It's ironic because they typically do engage in bonding 20-year buildings and engage in 3-year collective bargaining agreements, but they have no responsibility to forecast the impacts of those acts. I'm very uncomfortable with the way the current plan looks. I would not want to be chair of this committee and trying to explain that plan at town meeting. It already shows some significant deficits each year, and the cost growth that's in there over the period from FY22 to 26 is just under 3%. The 5 years before that, we grew at over 4%. Now, some of that is adding debt and losing debt. But what the forecast does not take into effect is inflation in any way, shape, or form. And I would not want to be the next chair of this committee going before the town meeting, trying to explain why it is that we now have to ask for a tax increase or such thing when we showed them this plan last year, and they'll say, what, you didn't see the inflation coming? It's been here for a year. how dumb are you guys? So you need to get back to ALG, and we need a real forecast.
May I?
So you're saying you think we need to reconvene ALG and have this forecast updated for print in the warrant? For print in the...
It's going in the warrant. Somebody usually talks to it. It's usually us. 'Cause,
Right.
If they don't want to do it, then we have to do it. We can change the name to the Finance Committee Long-Range Plan. That's been done once or twice when we couldn't agree, but it needs to get done.
Okay, there was agreement to revisit those numbers in June, but...
In the
okay.
summertime, yeah.
Yeah.
That's not soon enough.
So let me see if I can interpret your words, Mr. Noon. I think perhaps what you would like to see is the Finance Committee producing their own ALG plan.
No.
No? They're all shaking their heads no, but I thought this was a great idea that I heard you say.
We're not looking to break LG here.
No, we're not. And nobody probably has a long enough memory to remember this, maybe Steve Barrett, but yes, when I was chair, we once did that.
Well, I got kind of excited because I like doing
it's
things
not,
like that.
we have the responsibility to plan, but we can't execute. So
But we could certainly-
the plan has to be something that can be implemented. And, so we need them to be a partner in the planning.
Right.
They are always reluctant. It's always an issue at ALG. It always is an issue at this time of the budget cycle. They don't want to plan ahead.
What you're saying is you'd like to see a more accurate pro forma statement,
Yeah.
or more thoughtful.
We can start by asking them what their assumptions are.
Okay. I
There-
hear you loud and clear.
There are assumptions you can make on compensation, on the effect of debt and capital spending, and it will pretty much get you where you need to be. But if you think that a situation where you have 80% of your costs pretty much tied up in compensation, and most of them involved in collective bargaining agreements that have cost of living escalators, and you think you're going to get out of it for 2% or less in the next 3 years, I don't think it's going to happen.
So, Mr. Barrett, are you ready to have a new best friend for the next 12 months? Because it's you and me, buddy.
As one of the bean counters, absolutely.
Right? Even, I caught that.
And what is the cost of a can of beans these days?
Yeah, even in that meeting, when we pushed the issue, and there was some hesitation in forecasting that actually eventually led to agreement, that we did need to do some earlier forecasting than usual, an off-the-cuff and agreed-upon number by Peter and David brought the school increase from 3.25 to 3.75 as a more likely number, and that was just an off-the-cuff with some knowns. So we already basically have agreement that it does not reflect the outward years properly, and so we will work on what we can do to get something that's a little more accurate put into the warrant. Jason?
Sorry.
Oh.
You good?
I was going to say, it's important that we not be caught having not paid very close attention to this, because as we've discussed in previous meetings, there is the very real specter of an override, which we have not seen in greater than 10 years here. I do not for a second want to be accused of having not seen it coming when we've already said it multiple times. So if the ALG numbers cannot be reconciled for covering an override in the next, honestly, in the next 3 years, I'd love to see it be, you should be able to see an override coming 5 years out, barring a disaster. If we think there's going to be an override in the next 3 years, we absolutely have to start declaring it now, and we have to start planning to avoid it as best we can, because no faster way to lose an override vote than to stand up and say, yeah, we saw it coming, we didn't do anything about it, so good luck with that. We want the money.
Christy?
I know you and Adam have heard me state strongly about this. Very concerned about the statement in the ALG meeting of just plugging in 26%, which Peter Light had said in a previous meeting too, as the expected assessment increase for Minuteman. That is really blatantly out of nowhere. It is a frighteningly large number that has no relationship to reality, and that needs to be stopped immediately. At a minimum, we need Minuteman to come here and talk to us. Just for those of you who haven't paid as much attention to this, our assessment is based on our 3-year rolling enrollment, which has skyrocketed. We are, I think this year, like this next coming year, is at our new, much higher enrollment.
It's a 6-year average, so we're not done yet.
But I thought that was when we were supposed to hit, and this was from a presentation. Okay, backing up 5 steps. They gave a presentation when Roland was chair to us about projections forward out, and it showed the rolling off of when we've reached our cap enrollment effectively. And unfortunately, the finance director who gave that presentation is no longer there, and they have not been able to put their hands on it. So really, much sooner than later, we should get Dr. McQuillan or someone from there in.
Retired.
He has not left yet.
Not yet.
Which is why we need to do it now. That was where I was going.
He probably is not doing tours.
No, but I was speaking to him about this. We should get him in really to ALG, but if you can't set it up quickly enough, bring him in here to talk to us, because we all need to understand this. It's not a huge number, but it's not going to be 26%, and I'm concerned about getting into a discussion where people are really worried about where that number's going. I'd rather cut that off at the head.
Mike.
Yeah, a few comments about Minuteman. You know, the current design capacity of Minuteman is 628 pupils. Many of the original member towns, originally it was 12, now it's down to 9. They thought that this was a number that would never be reached. One of the reasons some of the communities dropped out, like Boxborough. Now this year, Minuteman will have over 700 students, with 50 more on the waiting list. Plans are in place to increase capacity to 800 next year without the use of MSBA funding. The Meadow prefab building, which they call the North Building, has been delayed from June to November due to supply chain issues. It's an industry-wide problem. That's going to be it's going to add classrooms and conference spaces and a lot of teaching opportunities. The East Campus, which is the old Treant School in the area that Minuteman's owned, they're in partnership with the Boston Veterinary Clinic, and they signed 2 leases, and they're working on a 3rd. Minuteman has the capacity to sign long-term leases up to 50 years. Long-term leases give the owner some options regarding the space. And there is a $500,000 proposal for an equipment grant. Space needs for MTI are increasing rapidly. Dr. McQuillan will be available to FinCom, and he's planning on attending town meeting if necessary, but we can get him here to explain the ever-changing assessment. But this population explosion, especially kids from Acton, do you think we send them there for free? They're all on IEPs.
They are not all on IEPs.
Well, mostly.
No.
Many of them are on IEPs.
No.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. But anyway, he'll make himself available.
He will. Christy was saying that the increase was mischaracterized as higher than it actually is. She is very pro-Minuteman. Go ahead, Adam.
Sorry, I just wanted to also come back to Christie's comment, because it really reinforces what Mr. Noon said, which is that, if you don't have a plan that has A, enough history, and B, enough thoughtful projection and accurate projection, then it's impossible to use it as a tool, right? So in the specific comment that you're talking about, what do we have in front of us? We have 2 years of historical data, one of which says 27% increase, another one that says 29 and change. And so it's easy to just plug in a number of 26 saying, well, that's less than both of those. So it seems reasonable, right? So I think that really puts the emphasis on the point that I've made since I started on this committee, which with regard to the town budget book, as well as with regard to the ALG plan, 2 years of history in there is not nearly enough. It should go back in perpetuity backwards so that if somebody wants to, they can pull it out. So that just reinforces the reasoning for that type of data. So just want to emphasize that.
The Minuteman data is difficult to do in a historic manner just because the member township has changed, the building has been made, the student population from all of the member towns, including Acton, have gone up significantly because of the new facility and the new offerings. But I hear what you're saying. It is nice to have the historical data. It's kind of like looking at the long-term AB before this, before we joined forces.
Right.
Go ahead, Christy.
I'm sorry if there was any confusion. I think Minuteman is an incredible program. We are extremely lucky to be a part of it. I wholeheartedly support it in every way. I would hate to see any fuel for the fire of people I've heard grumbling in the past about the expense to be fed. I think it is worth every penny, but I don't want to give people the wrong tools to use.
Jason.
I'm not going to comment on whether or not it's a great program or not. I am going to say that I do not like the approach they took. I think it's death by a thousand cuts. One of the things that we did on the new twin school in town was we came with a guaranteed maximum price, and we did one bond, period. The Minuteman has had at least 4 years worth of bonds, if not longer, and now it's not even big enough within 2 years of opening up. It may be a great program, but the new building project was executed poorly. If it can't even fit the number of students within 2 years, somebody projected poorly. And the number of bonds is not appropriate. You need to do a better job of planning and not have multiple bites of the apple where every year it seems like it's a surprise, dangerous number. There should have been much better planning in this.
Let me just say this. The project was costed out at $144 million. It came in at $144 million. They have not overspent. They brought the project in early. And it's just been such a success that the population has exploded. You try to control those costs when you wanted to put in twice the number of kids in a school that, a brand new school that was designed for. And many of the member communities did not believe, and they felt vehemently that we would never find that many kids interested in a vocational education. And this proves them absolutely wrong. As I said, vocational education as well as conventional education is not cheap. And if our population from Acton goes from 30 to 80, of course your assessment's going to be higher.
Okay, I'd like to mostly table this discussion until we can have Dr. Buchalin in, but David, go right ahead.
I just have two very quick things. I think one thing that's really important to do is to separate the enrollment from the cost per pupil. This has been John Peterson's point for a long time. So the enrollment, when we do the ALG spreadsheet for next year, we will know the enrollment increases. We should include that in the spreadsheet. So if we're going to have 90 students next year, and we had 70 this year, we can figure out the rolling 3-year average and figure out that percentage exactly. And then when we talk to the Minuteman folks, we should be concentrating on the cost per pupil, right? Because their cost per pupil is also going up much higher than we can afford, and that's really in their control. What our enrollment is our enrollment.
Right. Okay, and we will have a lengthy Minuteman discussion. We will invite them to the committee, and we can continue this conversation at that time. I'm going to go ahead and move on. Any other committee reports down this end? No. Okay. Adam, Select Board.
So if you saw your email from last night on the select board update, you saw that the select board did not take any action on the CPC, so that rate will stay the same. And then the other item was the Mbta new zoning legislation, which was enacted last January, I believe, which we are now starting to become under the gun to comply with. Did any of you happen to either watch the meeting from last night, or have you gone on the mass.gov website to read about the Mbta zoning? Raise your hand if you have no clue what this is. The rest of you are well informed?
I watched it.
I went on the website. Now, that all that did is generate a whole lot more questions than answers.
Okay.
right.
Would you all like me to do a quick read-through synopsis from their website, pulling out the points that I felt were fairly pertinent to our discussion?
Give us
Okay.
the Cliff Notes.
I actually thought that Kristen clarified more things on the website.
Yes.
She did, because she went into a lot more depth. And so what I got between watching and listening to her presentation and her Q&A, I felt I could get just about the same amount of information off of just the sort of the front page of the website. Plus, there was one Q&A answer that hit a lot of the points that she got to last night. So hopefully that'll do it. Are you proposing that maybe we just watch the meeting or that portion of the meeting?
No, it was long.
Okay.
No, it's really interesting, but it was
I
long.
highly recommend you watch it. I really
Agreed.
do.
All right, go ahead.
I'll start by saying this is, I think, going to become an extremely hot topic over the next 2 years, because it has the potential to, I think, dramatically change the town and the feel of the town. For good or bad, I don't know. So the MBTA, what is an MBTA community? So it's basically the towns that are either on the rail line or on the bus line. We'll just leave it at that. It's a little bit more involved, but that kind of serves the purpose. And so what's the new requirement? The new requirement is that these towns shall have a zoning ordinance or bylaw that provides for at least one district of reasonable size, which I think there's going to be a lot of debate about, in which multifamily housing is permitted as, and put this in quotations, of right, end quotations. It's a specific type of legal term whereby if the zone says by right, this can be multifamily zoning, and Isha wants to go and buy a property that has a single-family home in that district, she can go and buy that property, tear the house down and build a multifamily unit, and does not have to go to special committee for zoning overrides. Am I stating
But-
anything incorrectly yet? Okay.
That's not just tear it down. You have the property, you
convert.
can put any size house
Right, you can do
you want
whatever you
on
want
it
with
for
it.
as many units, as long as it fits within the general bylaws of setbacks, floor area, ground cover ratios, parking, et cetera.
I'm going to interject, and rather than read from this right now, and just say that my understanding from Kristen Bouchard's presentation last night was that these type of zoning areas are exclusive of 40B and anything we've done with 40B in the past, and it sounded like generally would be difficult to include multifamilies that have been approved in the past and call them now legal for this, perhaps because of some of the wording that she's been getting into in a little bit more depth, because those people had to go through a special process to get those permits. I'm not sure the details of that, but that was kind of the gist of what I got. I think one of the things I did misstate to all of you in my email was I had taken away that this zone had to have an average density of 15 units per acre. That was wrong. When you read the website, it's a minimum density of 15 units per acre. Yeah, the mouths drop when you say that. Like, that is thick. That's kind of the gist of it. One of the takeaways I got from last night was that I kept hearing people say, 1,300 units, and I couldn't figure out where that came from. But if you go onto their website and you pull up your own town, and I don't really know the technicality of this, but they're basically requiring each town to zone enough space to make a minimum number of units available. And for Acton, it's 1,383 units. So if you took, and it's a minimum of 50 acres too, if I'm not mistaken. So if you take 50 acres times 15 units per acre, that's only 750 units. Right.
It would be.
It was,
50 acres would mean 26
Yeah.
units per acre. 87 acres is how we would get to 15 units per acre. So even though we're only required the 50,
Yeah, so one way or another, we have to be able to zone the possibility for 1,383 new units.
well, and the possibility is key there. This
Right.
isn't, no one has to build this.
Once the zoning is done, the whole thing just, it's laissez-faire
Explodes.
after that.
Yeah.
Well, it's just laissez-faire. However the market plays it out, that's how the market plays it out.
I need some clarity around this. So is it a requirement to have that in order to get that funding?
Yes.
Yes,
it will be.
eventually.
We have
yeah.
until, I believe, 2024. It was steps along the way include discussions at the select board, coming up with a plan, and then beginning zoning changes that eventually lead us to the right number by sometime in 2020, December of 2024, I believe. So, so the housing has to be open to everyone, no age restriction, no bedroom restrictions. At least one area of the zoning must be 25 acres in value. And then after that, it can be as little as 5 acres to get up to the entirety of of the 50 acres.
Oh, so minimal 5-acre plot, maximum 15.
No maximum, we could zone the whole town. Minimum 5 acres, but at least one of our zoning areas has to be 25 acres.
And
in
that
size.
generally needs to be within a half mile of the train station or bus station.
Right.
But before you freak out too much, in West Acton, on the corner of Central and Arlington Street, there's around that corner, there's a bunch of connected townhouses. Those all qualify. We do, and there's a new development going up on School Street that's the same thing. It's just a bunch of connected townhouses. It's not, we're not talking big apartment building or anything. There actually are units within the town, not unfortunately within the area School Street might be, but that already, like, there are developments that would qualify for this.
But I thought if it has gone through some other process for
No.
permitting, it doesn't qualify?
No, what has to happen is it would need to qualify under the new requirements. So if you took that lot in Arlington, in West Acton on Arlington Street, and if that was in the new zone, all set. Doesn't matter that that had a special permit to do it if it did, which I presume it did. If it would qualify under the new zoning, then you're fine.
Yeah, that's still a little bit fuzzy. We're not experts on that answer just yet.
Right, right.
But I got one takeaway, and basically the takeaway I got was that a lot of the 40B housing wouldn't automatically be able to just slot in this multifamily. Another thing to note is that the minimum requirement for a particular lot is one building with 3 units in it, or 2 buildings with at least 2 units. So a single 3-family home or double duplexes on one property. That's the minimum.
Where was that? I didn't see
That's
it.
here in the
Oh,
state
okay.
regulations, so.
So,
And that, she defined that very well last night.
but the zoning has to predate, the zoning change has to predate any of the construction.
I think what he was originally saying was that we have 40B all over town.
Right.
That doesn't count unless that 40B happens to be in an area that we then rezone under this law, so that it is now unrestricted,
Got it.
whereas before it was allowed to be built in a restricted area. So,
You probably have more questions than we have answers for.
that's true.
However, like I say, if you go on here, read their entire preamble. Before you get into the details of the draft legislation, I would recommend going to the Q&A and go through the entire Q&A first, and then go and start looking. I haven't even started looking at the draft, and I haven't even finished getting through all the Q&A yet.
I would watch the prepresentation
Oh, yeah, sorry.
that
Watch-
Kristen did.
Yes.
See what questions you have and then go look.
Yeah, do that first. Go watch the board meeting on YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so let me just read you the Section B, location of districts, question and answer B1 off of the website, because I think this is fairly interesting. And this is where I kind of see light at the end of the tunnel, because it sounds like it gives the town some, at least decent enough so far, wording and latitude on how, when, and where they can place these zones that maybe you can make it work in a community. Because I think, to me, what's frightening about the legislation is if you just read the face of it, you think 50 acres in a half-mile radius around the train station is just going to be high-rise apartment complexes, right? And so the B1 question is, how much discretion does each MBTA community have with respect to where a multifamily district is located? And the answer is a multifamily zoning district must be located within 1/2 mile of the transit station with at least half of the district's land area within the half-mile radius, when that is possible. Now, here's what I love about legislation. They always throw in a, when it's possible, or, you know, how much latitude can you get from that? Potentially infinite. I mean, who knows? Or potentially none, right? So, and then it goes on to say, where it is not possible to locate a district within 1/2 mile of the transit station, cities and towns otherwise have considerable flexibility to decide where to locate these districts. These districts may be located where there are existing single-family, multifamily, commercial, or other existing uses and structures, or in areas ready for redevelopment. DHCD strongly encourages cities and towns to consider multifamily districts where there is existing or planned pedestrian and bicycle access to a transit station, or that otherwise are in areas of concentrated development. So one of the things that Kristen mentioned last night that she got from some of the webinars and things that she's attended is that one of the things they're encouraging is to try to get some of these zones near town centers. So even if you can't get it right at the train station, get it near shopping complexes, get it near town centers. So I'm just trying to tell you my take on where I see some light at the end of the tunnel for being able to meet these criteria. Regardless of location, each community must demonstrate that the zoning allows for multifamily housing that meets or exceeds the requirement unit capacity and at a density that meets the statutory minimum. So we're just scratching the surface here. There's a lot more involved. I feel it's going to be an extremely important topic, and I've been talking with Christine a little bit about it today. My personal feeling is that I feel like we as a finance committee should really dig into this and do a tremendous amount of due diligence, either with or without the town, to either support the town in doing the due diligence and some of the planning, or to at least come up with a separate objective opinion so that we can then meet and compare the two opinions and see where they match and see where there's discrepancies. And maybe, you know, I feel there's going to be a lot of creativity involved with trying to comply with this. And there's also the option that the town might decide to heck with it, we don't want to comply with it. So, what's the risk we don't? So I don't know how quick I can find the specific answer, but there's a whole bunch of funding sources that we would lose or could potentially lose.
So,
Oh, it's just 3? I thought it was more than 3.
what we basically got within the last few years was about $3.5 million for different projects, subsidized. There are Mass Works grants and Housing Choice. I don't have the third one in front of me. In the last few years, we received about $3.5 million in grants towards projects, and the Water District also gets a discount, and those things are taken away if we don't comply.
Water District's not ours.
It affects our residents. You're in the Water District.
I got a comment.
Mike?
Yeah, I think some of these housing issues are addressed, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Martin, in Acton's housing plan. I mean, in their housing plan, I don't know if they were going to implement it, but they have strategies on how to implement some of these densities that they're looking for. The other ironic thing about this plan, especially building around a commuter rail station, is assuming that your employees or the workers, say the blue collar workers, are coming from Boston. For Acton, the situation is it's not, the South Acton rail station is kind of irrelevant because most of the manufacturing workers here in Acton come from Lowell and Lawrence. And, they would commute, the best way to get them to employment areas here would be, say, shuttle buses or something like that, but they would not use commuter rail.
Mike, I was pondering this today, and kind of thinking that I suspect that the purpose of the legislation is to try to encourage growth near the MBTA lines to increase ridership and thereby reduce costs and possibly increase or improve traffic flow. And in my pondering, I suspected that for every one person that you add to the commuter rail through this process, you're probably going to add 3 or 4 to the streets, who are still going to get on Route 2 or get on other roads and go in different directions. If that's the purpose of it, I'm sort of doubtful that it will
Might
a
have
great
something to do
effect.
with housing as well.
Sorry, but yes, sorry.
Isha, did you, oh, no, you're good, okay. So, okay, we are going to come back to this at a later meeting. This is our first coverage of this, so I'm gonna task everybody with some reading and some homework and watching sections of the select board meeting. However, questions to the state have to be in by March 30th. We will not have a meeting before then. So if anybody does come up with some questions that they would like potentially asked, can we submit those to you or to Kristen? Do you know? Yeah. We can submit them on our own. Okay. So we'll if you guys could get me questions by the end of the weekend, I would say, so that I can put them together, that would be great. Yeah.
On the link I sent everybody, there's a little blue tab that says submit your comments, okay? You just go there, you put in your information, you can say anything that you want.
Or you can do that. You don't have to go through me.
Thoughtful, reactive, however you want to say it.
One very good question that Kristen had was we've got the CAT commuter bus, and would that possibly count? If anybody lives on the line that picks up, would that potentially count towards areas we could rezone?
And the deadline for that is March 31st.
Yes.
After that, no more public comment.
Yeah.
Okay?
Jason, did you still want to say something?
Just one of the things that I would like to get more information on is exactly what is our exposure of lost programs. For example, I believe, and I'm not sure of this, but I believe that isn't MassWorks one of the funding sources for Kelly's Corner?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Is that money already awarded and subject to clawback? Or is it not?
The
subject-
program would be done before we would be out of compliance.
Okay, because.
What if it wasn't?
If we can't get that done in 2 years, we have other problems.
It was
It's a
voted on
risk.
3 years ago, so,
It's
a risk.
shovel ready. It's going.
Yeah.
It's right, Dave? They're going to put the shovel in the ground any day now on Kelly's Corner. That's the rumor I've been spreading on Facebook, so I hope it's accurate.
This is one of the reasons I see this as a hot topic that I don't think we should wait on. And I love that Christine actually disagreed. They said, well, why don't we just wait a little while and see how things start to pan out? And I said, man, I just don't feel comfortable with that. I feel like we should put a committee together and start working on some due diligence. And I came up with a long list of things I'd like to know specifically about what do we have in the works? How much does it represent? What's the end date? What are we at
I
risk
think
of
Christine
losing?
probably only really wants to wait until like the second week of May.
Just June, right?
Then
Just
then
June?
she might be more interested in picking it back up.
Listen, it's only 9:30. We have till 3 a.m.
Sure. What time does the bar close?
I'm
Anyway.
sorry, Madam Chair. I will
So
relinquish my microphone.
this will be on a coming up agenda item so that we can have a more detailed discussion with more detailed answers. Anybody have anything else they would like to report or discuss? Okay, I remind you that if you're free at 6 o'clock tomorrow and would like to tour the DPW facility, that can be arranged. Since, Avi, is this your first meeting? No, Steve came into a first meeting after you, so Steve, I'm sorry, as the most recent member. I know, but it's one of those things where until somebody else comes onto the committee, it's actually you. So I will entertain a motion. It's okay.
A motion to adjourn. Second.
We've had a motion to adjourn in a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Good night, y'all.